Hello, everybody. It's Sarah Kumalo here, and you are back with us on Summits with a Purpose in conversation with Mr. Turner. I'm actually going to let you pronounce your name because I don't want to make a mistake again. For the longest time, I called you something different, and I know how that feels because people call me all sorts. So, guys that are joining us now, I hope you enjoy the fun. He is the youngest African, actually, and South African to summit Mount Everest. And I would love to have a conversation with you to understand what your thinking was, your experience, and share it with people now and those that will join us a little bit later because this is going to be recorded. So welcome to Summit with a Purpose. And please tell us about you.
Thank you, and thanks for having me, Sarah. It's a great privilege. So yeah, I'm Lysle Turner, born and raised, obviously in South Africa, a very special place to all of us. Just a bit about me from a mountaineering perspective. I think I always had an inclination and an interest in terms of adventure, but I think stepping into the realm and making that commitment to actually commit to something like Everest was not something I thought I would ever do. And then I have a close link to Huntington's disease, which is a neurodegenerative brain disorder. And that's impacted my family for more than 4 generations. And it was in my kind of teens when I heard about this. And it was really at that point in my life where I was just like, how can I channel my energy, not even as a professional yet? I'm nothing in any sense of the word at that point in my life. What could I be doing actively to make an impact? And I think as the years went by and I got out of school, it really doubled down that it was something I could do, just being an athlete of sorts. And it was also kind of something that I wanted to put to bed from a family perspective. And I only kind of became known of my status a couple of months before I went to Everest, and I tested negative for the disease. So it was an amazing blessing, but obviously, that also kind of brings it home that you need to be safe in a really volatile environment. So I think it's just from that perspective, I see that adversity in my life was the biggest blessing because it really made me accelerate decisions in my life I needed to make in terms of career, in terms of wanting to climb Everest, in terms of wanting to make an impact in people's lives. So I just looked at it that if I was going to develop this condition, it's generally the age of onset is from kind of 30 years old. So I wanted to crash in my whole life streams into before 30. And that's kind of how I went relentlessly at climbing Everest, starting my foundation, starting businesses. And I think if it wasn't for that, I think I'm a different person at the end of the day, because if you set a serious timeline to your life, I think there's a lot more actions you need to take to get the gears going and let that happen. So that's a very high level overview of kind of what influenced my life and the kind of triggers and motivators that's come about.
That's interesting, and thank you for sharing that. I think we take a lot for granted, and you're absolutely right. If you have a timeline, there's a sense of agency to everything that one does, and you appreciate life a lot more differently. And I'm glad you actually don't have the disease, and I thank God for that. So before we go on to the mountains, one of the things that I picked up about you is that you were Mr. Pretoria for 2012. How do you move from Mr. Pretoria to Everest? Because Everest is tough, right? And there's like, you're in the tent, there's no, I looked at your picture and I'm like, you clean up nicely, because when I saw you on Everest in 2015, that wasn't you. So how do you move from that to climbing?
Yeah, look, I had climbed before I did that, but the gist of it, I think, is obviously that's it's a very kind of visual world of you judged on your looks and that sort of impact. And I think it came very much of playing cricket. I think sports people can easily move into those sort of realms of any sort of fitness modeling or something like that, just because they can have a talent and a look. And, in South Africa at the time, I seemed to, for whatever reason, have that. And it was a lovely platform in terms of, really people trying to make impacts where they can, for what they're passionate about, and I think for me, it was a good introduction to what I wanted to do from my foundation point of view. And I think, moving that to the mountains, I think it's still a way to move to, because there's a lot of lessons we can learn in the mountains. And I think deep down, that's always who I was. I was this little adventurous kid. So, I was more out of my comfort zone being in that industry than being kind of the mountain is more my home, where that's what I was comfortable with in general.
Yeah. I totally can relate to that. I have new respect for models, after my recent experience. But having said that, 2015 on Everest, can you tell us, maybe take us through the journey to 2015 on Everest? How did you train for it? How did you prepare? How did you get into mountaineering and then found yourself in 2015 on the mountain?
Yeah. So how I got into mountaineering, actually, the first time I climbed I was 13. We climbed Kilimanjaro as a family, as like a little family team builder. And, it was, my dad was working away, and the holidays we'd spend time together. And, it was really 10 years on from that day where I really started getting back into it. So yeah, the build up, I'd say, to Everest was a good few years. But again, it's that decision in terms of timeline that forced the trigger. And I think Everest is a lot about preparing in different ways, mentally, physically, financially, plus whatever else. There's so many factors. So I think it's a special place to go in terms of that, because you could be an insane athlete, but that doesn't get you there. And I think the financial road is a very difficult in itself, because you have so much training to do, and you're like, can I even get there? So let alone your physical preparation. So there's so many things to dabble into. But from a point of view, I'm always the type of person that likes to leave no stone unturned. So in terms of, let's talk about the three: physical, mental, and financial. Quickly, the financial part, I think there's many different ways one can approach climbing. And I think one way that has been seen in the past is obviously looking for sponsors and align yourself, with people. But I wanted to eradicate any risk or any chance of me not going out of it completely. And that's why I didn't even go that route, because I was always a believer that if I wanted, from a sponsorship perspective, I haven't been there. Who am I to say I can do it? So who's to say anyone's going to back me? So you really have to hard sell yourself, which is opportunity. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I wanted to, as I said, eradicate any chance of not going. And I believe that must be your full-time job if you're looking for any form of sponsors. And that was not what I wanted to do. So, I just doubled down on I have an obsession with business and nonprofit, and I kind of compartmentalized both sides. And I came to the inclination that the only guarantee is that from a profit perspective, I need to be more successful individual. I have to look at new ways to make, different income, and just guarantee that I can be there. And that's, if I went at it that way and I couldn't make the cut in terms of that financial ability, I would also have been okay with it, because it's in my hands, and I don't like things that are out my hands. So that's the way I approached it, which is difficult, but I thrive on that, because I train harder. I always look at it as my life was at this like 9,000 RPM. Everything was better because I was giving everything I had. So I find it in life that it's important for me to have something, because I adopt that same mentality. If I can dabble onto the fitness side, because I played Premier League cricket here in Pretoria, I reached out to one of my coaches, and I just said to him, listen, this is what I'm wanting to undertake. I'd like to train within that system, where the professionals are training, but just to be in that environment. And I think that's something important, getting yourself into some form of professional environment. And a lot of the guys knew me from previous, playing cricket. And importantly, my ex-coach had a big sense of belief in me. And I think a little bit of, he's a guy that could always put me in my place and tell me what I needed to hear sometimes. I think from a cricketing perspective, that was important, but not from a mountaineering perspective, it wasn't, because I always believed I'm training and preparing to save my life. And if I'm not willing to do more, I'm not willing to save my life if I'm in a situation. So that entailed like a lot of different stages of training, and it ranges from seriously heavy gear like sled pulling, in terms of pulling 200 kilograms on a sled for an hour and a half with a 30 kilo punching bag over my head, 20 kilo weighted vest and ankle weights. So if you look at the amount of weight I'm hauling, it's nearly 300 kilos. So sometimes it took me half an hour to 45 minutes just to get one lap around the cricket field. So I had a combination of serious hauling in terms of slowing the body down to how it impacts one at altitude, and the stronger you get, the more weights you've got to throw on. And I also felt that built a lot of patience for me. And then on the contrary to that, I did a lot of hypoxic training in the pool, like pushing 10 kilo weights at the bottom of the pool and doing lengths under the pool, just to have more pressure on the lungs and getting the body to use oxygen more efficiently. And obviously those sessions I had to be supervised, because, if shallow water blackouts are a real thing, and, it can just happen so quickly, because I'm also trying to push my body further and further along. So if something were to happen, someone needs to dive into the pool with me. So, I adapted a lot of my training also in terms of sleep deprived at times on a weekend. So I would go out with my friends, obviously just be there to stay awake, because I'm going to fall asleep at home. And then in the morning, I would do like a 12-hour session anywhere outdoors. So sleep deprived, fasted, no water. So, it's also trying to replay the environment, because on Everest, you might not have food, water, and you will be sleep deprived to some degree at some point in time. So it's just putting the body through its paces as much as possible. Obviously, there's a lot more intricacies, but it's really, the lengths I went to was my extreme. And every time I got to a point, I would want to push it a bit further and further, because, there's a big unknown with the climbing. So quickly, if I can touch on the mental
the
part.
last one.
I think the mental part for me was also critical, because obviously, I'm a big believer in control your thoughts, or they can control you. And so I would work a lot in terms of different triggers, and one was going through a deck of cards, so it's whatever card can symbolize a person, and so it just keeps the mind occupied. It's the same as an alphabet. You go from A to Z, and whatever pops in your mind, you can spend 15 minutes on A thinking about an apple, just because you're tired. But as long as it's keeping the mind occupied, it's a positive reinforcement to what you're trying to do. So I believed a lot on triggers, and then my one trigger was obviously the link to HD, and I would need to harness when I could use that or when I couldn't. So I always like to have a lot of things in my back pocket from a mental frame of mind, because there's so many different things, as to overcome on Everest.
Absolutely. That's interesting, and thank you for sharing those three components. But how did they prepare you for 2015? And where were you when the earthquake hit on that day?
Yeah, in terms of how they prepared me, I had a long list of scenarios before I left for Everest, and my family didn't like that I did it, but it's a what if scenario. So what if I lose the toe? What if this? What if that? So I'm a big planner, and I planned for an avalanche in my mind, how I would deal with it, and on the mountain where I would want to be if I was at each camp. But the one thing I did not write down was earthquake. So naturally, I think for the year after, I was like, why didn't I write that down? But then I mean, like, you can't predict anything. So I think how it prepares you for 2015. Obviously, the physical aspect. I was really able to, after the incident, make a big impact in terms of hauling people, to the designated IMG camp where we were moving people, and then from there moving them onto the helicopter. The physical aspect allowed me to carry a lot heavier weight and let other people be kind of concentrated, helping to carry other injured people. And that was my way of dealing with it. Some of my team members, as we survived, they were more in the shock component, and they didn't want to go help, and they didn't like that I was going, but that was my way of dealing with anything. So that the physical aspect, definitely. The mental aspect in terms of my preparation, I just think it's the adversity I'd gone through as a kid and as a young person, having gone through obstacles in terms of a hereditary condition. This was just another adversity kind of occasion that I needed to channel in a positive manner in the moment and coming home, because it is difficult. I think one goes through survivor's guilt, one goes through, there's all sorts of, why me, why that person. And so there's a range of emotions, and I just think, me having gone through a major crucible in my life before, I think that was just something that kind of stood me in good stead, so to speak, for that moment, because I knew how to deal and go through something. So it definitely had a big impact, and I guess that's also a lesson. If you sign up for anything that's a dream of yours, be prepared to go through anything that can come up during that time, because it's not just what you might think it is. It might be the worst thing that can happen to you in life is your dream. You might go through something on the way there that can be adversely affect your life.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for sharing. But I want to take you to that moment when the earthquake hit. I know there was a lot of confusion. People didn't know what was happening. Where were you? And when did you realize that it was an earthquake? How did it affect your camp? I think you were with Altitude Junkies, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
So I was at base camp.
Yeah.
I was at base camp. So obviously, in relation to the ice fall, we were a little bit further towards Russell Bryce's team, Hemex. Yeah. So I was in my tent at the time. Obviously, there was a whiteout on the day. We had just come down from Camp 2 one of the previous days, because we knew there was some bad weather coming through those days. So we had a team meeting and breakfast, mid-morning. And around just before it happened, I was just getting snuggling up in my tent, wanting to do some reading or have a nap or, do some journaling. And at that point, I felt the ground shaking. And I was just like, at the point in time, I didn't know what was going on, because obviously where we're sleeping, as you know, it's there's a glacier that's always cracking underneath you. Yeah. So you're also getting used to that. And as it got progressively worse, I stood up and I'm like, whoa. Because my big fear with the cracking ice was that, like a sinkhole could open beneath me and I fall into. So I was like, I'm getting out of here now. I don't want to be a two-man tent when there's something coming. And it was at that point I was putting on my 8,000-meter boots, and it literally toppled me over. And that's how severe it was where I was. It's like when you're trying to put on your shoes, your momentums, and I've just toppled over. And and it was at that time I heard the sound of obviously the glaciers, kind of coming loose and creating one big avalanche. So, I knew I wanted to be one place if an avalanche hit base camp, and that was in the gear tent. It was not in the two-man tent. So, a gear tent is a 5-meter tent with 2 months supplies. I wanted to be there because there's a lot more things I could put between me and what's coming. that was my drill. And as I heard it coming, I was listening, and I'm like, as soon as I heard the sound, because on Everest we gauge avalanches by sound, how close it can get to us. And if it gets to you, what's your plan? And that's when I just hightailed it. And I had about 20 meters to run. And between 20 meters, it was slow motion, but so much happened because one of my team members, she was like a young girl playing stuck in the mud. Her legs she was just frozen, and she was just staring at it. And as I was running to the tent, she was in my way. And as I ran past her, I just gripped her on the back of the collar, and I'm like, "You coming wherever I'm going?" and that's the last I remember, because from there we obviously just the sheer force of the avalanche, in terms of its wind speed, just also the spin drift was so severe. We got blown out the back of that tent. So as you know, not many people died from suffocation. It was mainly objects that became a projectile. And so the next time I came around, I had total blackout. I was holding her, and obviously just snow and the sight of red blood on white snow. And she had hit her face quite badly. And that was in the time where I was trying to feel if anything's broken on me. And when I didn't feel pain, it was like I had I couldn't hear anything. I was starting to see, and then I started to hear kind of the sounds of people in pain. So that was the kind of my 30 seconds of it. So much happened. I blacked out in one area, and I woke up about 10 meters away from where I last remembered I was.
Wow, thank you for sharing. That's actually crazy. And how do you reconcile that with the need to still climb? And you go back in 2016. How did you convince the family, and how did you convince yourself that I still want to do this? I know many times after I climb, people say, I'll never do this again. And a few months later, like, I'm going to do this again. When did you know that I'm coming back?
Look, I knew as it happened. I knew immediately the climb is over. Although I spent another 8 days there just waiting it out. But in the moment, I knew that trip is over, and I knew that my first thing was like, how do I prepare what I prepared for years to get here to do in 9 months, to get back. So it was two realizations immediately. And I think my family deep down knew as I got home, he's going back. My mom just maybe didn't want to believe it. My dad knows the type of person I am, and he was just like, even if he's done it, he'll be making a plan to do something else. So I think they always knew, but they were just so happy and overjoyed of kind of my safety, at the time, because it's a lot for a family to go through. I think those sort of events, and any support system. If I have a friend climbing, it's worse for me being at home and kind of just checking in with him. So there wasn't much convincing, but I just knew immediately that I can't not go back. I think the consequence for me to not would be more, because I'd keep playing the events in my mind over and over again that you're already kind of trying to put to bed. Because I think in times of crisis, there's definitely things that I don't agree with how people react. And if I didn't go back, I would not be able to forget about the things I was trying to put to bed from just a humanity perspective, the things I don't agree with. And so I always saw it as I have to go back, and that's the way of getting over the one event.
Yeah. So 2016, you're back on Everest. What did you do differently, compared to the previous time? What are the lessons that you picked up from 2015 that you used in 2016?
Look, the one thing most important, like a leadership lesson, is that adversity is a privilege. And that's what I learned growing up. And that's what I learned from that moment too. You have to put to bed whatever it is in your mind. And I only put to bed some thoughts as I walked into base camp. I sat there for 10 minutes. People knew what I needed to just think about and forget about, because I wanted a new trip as I walked in. But the big lesson was adversity is a privilege, and you've got to channel that into something good. It makes you a more effective leader managing through any crisis situation, and that's pivotal for any personal development of a leader. So I just looked at it from that standpoint in terms of a mental frame of mind. In terms of physical prep, I didn't do much different. I just kept my physical activity at the same kind of level. And in terms of 2015, I believed it wasn't a fair opportunity, because I just got to Camp 2, and obviously the incident happened. We're 25 days in. We still got another month, so I always want one good opportunity at anything in life. And if I'm not good enough to cut it, I'm not good enough to cut it. So I came back the following year, obviously saying and dreaming, just give me one opportunity, and that's all I believe I need, and that is all I needed. So it's just really working so hard to be in the right position to have my one opportunity. And so there was not too much that had changed. It's just waiting it out and actually getting through all the processes to the end.
Yeah, and you found yourself at the top of the world, and there's one of your goals. Tick tick. What was that experience like? How did you feel at the top, and how long did you spend on the summit?
Look, it's an incredible feeling. I always have like such outpour of emotion, at the top of a mountain. On Everest, I didn't have it though, because I also physically restrained myself to not have a happy moment, because I just, from the previous year, I also had a belief that, like, there's something always trying to stop you from achieving your goal. So don't give it one moment to creep in, and I think that is restricting myself, and it's a bit sad, but that's how dialed in I was. I was like, this is always something's trying to take this away from me, and it's not going to take it away from me. But, I summited at 3:30 in the morning. So it was pitch dark, and as I was coming through the South Summit, you have the Cornice Traverse. My right eye was tingling a little bit, and the closer I got to the summit, the faster I was going, because I was like, I want to get up and I want to get down. And the exposure close to the summit for me at pitch dark and at the rate of what I was moving was very intimidating. And obviously the last 50 meters or so is unroped. And, I immediately just stopped in my tracks, and I felt a bit of a gust of wind. And it was like 10 seconds where I just reassessed, and I'm like, wow, that was my first inkling of I'm so close, because my head was just down. And then I really just took it super slowly. And, when my headlamp kind of looked to not snow, it just looked into the oblivion. I was just like, wow, I'm here. And, being there in the dark was super intimidating. But it was, so special. I think it's, for anyone, it's just those last two steps feel forever, but it's just such an incredible moment. I probably spent 20 minutes there, and then, didn't want to wait for the sunrise, because I was thinking of waiting up for the sunrise. And, at that time, I saw that a lot of the people I had to pass on the way up, and I was just like, let me just get the job done and start making my way down.
Yeah. What is the most memorable time, of your climb? What is the thing that you remember so fondly of? And would you ever go back to Everest?
Oh, great question. Look, in terms of what I remembered seriously fondly of is for me, because I didn't have such a big moment on the summit. On my way down, I really took everything in, and so I summited, and I went all the way down to Camp 2 the same day. So it's a massive day, Camp 4 to the summit and back down to 2. But, just on the way down, I was very relaxed. Every half an hour, I would just sit and just, look at the universe and, this amazing place I was in the privilege of being, and also just to take the descent, which is obviously very dangerous, just take it really easy and enjoy the dangerous part of it, and just keep the concentration levels up, so that's the most memorable in terms of views and experience. As I fully came down the ice fall the following day, that was the moment I really let my guard down, and it was still in a place that I nearly lost my life the previous year, so it was like semi put my guard down. But that's where I had my moments, and I think that's special. I had a little note in my pocket of just writing like some motivational things for myself and what's important. And one of the things was like 4 generations, and that's 4 generations my family had been suppressed by something. And that little moment in my life, I could sit there and just think and ponder about that and the people, so that's the most special time, because it was just time of self-reflection and just looking back up of where you've come from. I think it's so special.
Well, yeah, that is special. Yeah.
In terms of if I would ever go back, I think if I could have 2 months off every year, I'd be on Everest every year. In terms of taking a little sabbatical. So I think I am a creature of habit. There's no doubt I will be on an 8,000 and Everest at some point again. There's no doubt about it. It just depends on the project. So I'd love to. So we'll see.
All right. So you are the youngest African and South African to summit Everest. How does that feel, and how important is that? When did you figure that out? And how old were you when you summited, by the way?
Yeah, I summited at 26, so just as I turned 26. So it's not a big thing for me, I obviously found out before I was going, I emailed the Himalayan database just for general information. So I think it's special what they do just in terms of recording, people and being there. And it was at that time where I saw, okay, well, that's a cherry on the top if it were to happen. So, because it's not doom and gloom if that doesn't happen. I think just for me getting to Everest, I think as a person, it's such an achievement, not even just being there and doing it, just the road to get there. There's so much going on in that person's life to do it. And I think everyone has their different reasons, and that's all fine. But I think just getting there is a great achievement. So
absolutely.
They're not the be all and end all for me, but it is still kind of nice.
That's true. So how do you choose a logistics company? I mean, I know logistics companies can make or break, or the guide that you choose can make or break the climb. What process did you go through to choose the logistics company? Did you go with the same in 2015 as well as 2016?
Yes. So, I did. And the process I'll always follow is also one that I think is very important is reaching out to the global community and just asking for feedback on the experience, not in terms of the how a company markets themselves. It's actually from people that have been on trips, and that's how they retain clients in terms of, yes, word of mouth marketing. But I want to ask intricate questions like, I don't want something taken away from me. So it's just like, I think a big goal, it also must depend on your objective. There's people in my viewpoint that say they want to climb mountains. They don't necessarily want to summit mountains. And I want to summit mountains, and I want the flexibility that, I've come all this way. If a first attempt doesn't happen in terms of something out of my control, I want a shot that something mustn't happen out of my control and my trip's over. It must be me that can't do it. Then my trip is over. Otherwise, it's you going home. It's preparation again. You reflecting on what other leaders did wrong. And that's what I don't like, so that's another criteria. I want to be in control of my decision making just based on my experience. And it's really not for everyone, and I don't advise it. I don't endorse it, but it's also for my family, it was something important because they knew if something happens in terms of Lysle, it's Lyle's own doing. And that's their closure. They can't go and phone someone and be like, you were leading him, what this and the next thing. If something happens to me, it's my own bad decision, and I must live or die by the sword, in terms of that decision. So in terms of me finding an outfitter, he must understand the character I am. I'm not a huge risk taker. I'm actually a very conservative person. But, you know, in a situation like that, he must understand that I back my abilities before anyone you want to throw at me. And if I go head to head with anyone, I'm going to back myself. And I think that's a lesson in life from a leader or anyone. It's, you know, you have to back yourself. If you have the experience and the credentials, you must back yourself. And so that was important for me, and that's why I went with Altitude Junkies. But you know, Altitude Junkies is a hardcore kind of environment. You know, if you don't know anything, that's not the environment to learn it, because you know, Phil Crampton is a badass. You know, he's an amazing person, but he's a badass. He's an incredibly strong climber. He expects you to know everything. So unless you're at that level, it's the last place, because I see him as a person providing services for really experienced people. He's just passionate about climbing and the mountains, and you know, and he just enjoys it. So, and you have the flexibility to create your own schedule. You know, so those key points for me are so important, because if I don't want to sleep at Camp 1, I don't want to sleep there. I have my own reasons. It's a dangerous camp. If there's an avalanche there, you get swept into the glacier. So I don't sleep there. I will go from base camp to Camp 2. And if I need to go somewhere else, but you know, it's that belief that within my knowledge and research, I want to go with what I believe. Because if I'm in a situation at Camp 1 because of someone that's put me there, I'm going to have serious beef with that person, because he's playing with lives.
Yeah, that's true. So I learned something about you, that you're not too interested in the 7 summits, but you've climbed quite a bit in Canada, and you do a fair amount of speed climbing and stuff like that. Are we looking at the first South African to do the 14 8,000ers?
Wow. That's a huge
Come on.
Ed Visas took 20 or 18 or 20 years to knock that off. So I graciously say no, you know, in terms of, because, you know, if I say yes today, I'm the type of person that I have to do it. So you know, I like to naturally let things unfold and see where they go. Because I think in terms of doing all 14, it takes a drastic lifestyle change in terms of my work and stuff. And you know, I think the older we get, we might have, you know, more of an inclination to take that sort of time off, and then the time's against me. But, you know, I definitely will be testing my body from no oxygen point of view on 8,000 meter peaks. I think I have the ability to top out, which hasn't been able, you know, from a lot of climbers haven't. So I believe I do have that, and that's the first thing for me. You know, I wouldn't want to do any other 8,000ers with oxygen, in terms of if I wanted to do a few. You know, I would want to start really testing the body on that level, and that's just a whole bigger unknown. So yeah, I'd never commit to such a big project, but you know, I'd love to be on a few others. So you never know where life goes.
All right. I think Lyle is being modest. He's one to watch. Let's keep watching him. I was trying to put you on a spot there, Lyle. What does adventure mean to you?
Look, adventure for me, it means something very important. You know, it's for me to get out where I'm not influenced by the rat race of life. You know, that kind of can form one's thinking and manipulate and steer our thinking. It's really being out, you know, with our creator at the end of the day too. You know, I'm a better person. I'm better in terms of my faith, which I don't claim to be the best at, very good at anything. But you know, it's close to my creator. I'm out there with my own thoughts, no impact from, you know, the outside world. So you know, that lets me create a lot of good ideas from a work point of view, from a person point of view. So just all around is like the kind of breakaway mini retirement I believe anyone needs, you know. And I think that reset is so important, because we can take it into our lives with new lessons in how we can tackle the world problems, because I think the world needs more leaders now than ever, and good ones as such. So, you know, it's an environment where I can just kind of be creative and not be pressured by the outside world.
True, well said. I really appreciate that. What are the 3 things that you, if they are, that you take on all your climbs or all your adventures?
Items.
Yes, items. Like I must have. Can you think of any 3?
Look, in terms of 3, obviously from a South African perspective, is some biltong or something. That's so nice. From an eating perspective, it's biltong, and I like these little corn snacks. It's like spicy corn. So those are the 2 things I take. They can. But in terms of feeling good, I like to have. I'm a big fan of Lululemon, the clothing brand. As a woman, do you know it? I'm sure you must know it.
I know Lululemon.
Lululemon, in terms of, you know, there's always a time on a mountain where you're down in the dumps. You might be grumpy because of the weather or craving some food or something, or dirty. And, you know, if I like do a bucket wash my hair, and I put on a Lululemon top, it's like comfort, you know, and sometimes you just need that comfort. So in terms of those down in the dump days, I need my Lululemon shirt, you know, it just makes me so good. Yeah, and then I'll take a journal and a family portrait in the inside of the journal that goes on the inside of my down suit. So, you know, those in a nutshell, that's something I won't leave without, because they all make you feel something, and I think that's important in those environments.
Yeah. Yeah, that Lululemon definitely takes the cake. I take perfume, you know, you wipe and I want to smell good. I don't care where I am, how tough it is. I just want to smell like a human being.
Yeah.
So yeah, everybody has got their own thing. You know, I know that you've been climbing and raising money for your charity. If people want to follow, you know, what it is that you're doing and they want to support it, where can they reach you?
Look, I think in general, it's just to reach out to me. So if you just type me in Google or whatever, you'll find an email address or a number. You know, if you follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or just, you know, you'll find a contact pretty easily online. And, you know, just to collaborate, or just, you know, even if it's just to share kind of the collective consciousness of people wanting to impact others. You know, I think that's the most important thing, you know. So, yeah.
Okay, so we've got questions. Louis Customs, I think you know him. He says that you've got the mental fortitude to get far on 8,000 a mountain without oxygen. So there we go, Louis. I'm actually convincing him to be the first South African to do all 14. He's pushing back at this point, but we are going to watch him. And Metzi says, inspiring talk as always. What lessons from Everest are you applying in your day-to-day life as well as professionally?
What am I applying? Is that the question?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. What lessons from Everest you're applying daily in your life and professionally as well?
So the 3 pivotal ones are: adversity is a privilege. The second one is one out of Louis's book. One of the things that Louis told me is to take charge of your climb. And I think that's relative in terms of one's life and one's business, whatever you're doing in life, because, you know, there's so many intricacies you need to take charge of within your life, within your business, from a leader perspective. And sometimes we so often just driving with one hand on the steering wheel, you know, and as a leader or organization, you need to do what it needs, how it needs, and when it needs it. So that takes a strong leader to take charge of those situations. And then the third thing is style. So obviously, as a leader, it's important to develop a leadership style, how you want to operate. And that goes back into climbing. You have to decide in what style you want to climb. You know, the more traditional, top heavy, I'd like to call it, expeditions with a lot of, you know, military kind of style, a lot of people, a lot of support, or the more alpine style, fast and light, you know. So as an individual, I think it's important to build a style in how we want to lead, because it also teaches us how to lead effective teams, and those dynamics. So yeah, I think any key leadership journey needs to adapt a leadership style. So those are 3 brief points, but I think they're pivotal, that can be related to mountains and work or people's lives more broadly.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you for the questions, Metsi. Thank you, Louis, for your comment there. I know you're still young, but what lessons, knowing what you know today, I mean, 2 Everest expeditions and all the mountains that you've climbed and the business, and I picked up, you did your MBA at Harvard. Well done on that. That's a big one. What lessons would you give your younger self? There are young people that follow this and they may listen to it. What is it that you know now that you wish you knew before all these expeditions?
Look, I think one key factor as any young person that I like to double down on is not to have it all figured out sometimes, or don't expect to have it all figured out, because I think there's times in our lives where we just want to start running and we don't know which direction, but sometimes we run aimlessly, and sometimes running aimlessly is fine because there's no highway to have it all figured out. So I think we can definitely put so much unnecessary pressure on ourselves, but we don't have it all figured out sometimes at any phase in our life. But I'm a big fan of really getting stuck in and actioning something, because even from a work perspective, it's a seriously high percentage of businesses in South Africa, startups, that fail. So don't see the failure as the failure of your life. At least you got stuck in and you were part of something, and you can learn lessons why it didn't work. That's the name of the game in business and in life. So if you have it all figured out, life's also pretty boring, because I don't know who has it all figured out, because then you're also not learning. So you're not asking the right questions. So, my younger self, I put an incredible amount of pressure on myself to start running, and obviously because I said, Lyle, you must do everything in 10 years, it was kind of an obsession. So, I'm very proud of that aspect, because it put me in a lot of situations, and it kind of just steered me quicker where I actually needed to be at the end of the day.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. How has COVID-19 and the lockdowns affected you? Maybe your expeditions, your business, and how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, look, I think, wow, this year it's just been a whirlwind, I think, for everyone. Look, from a business standpoint, pre-event, I kind of pulled the trigger on a few things. In terms of my one business, I sold a lot of stock I had just to liquidate into cash. So to also put into the next opportunity. So that was a quick move I did just to keep the powder dry, get a lot of cash into get cash so I could make my next move. And then from the other concern, I was lucky enough not to lay off any people. But I think it's just been a difficult ongoing road, because I am a 9,000 RPM guy. I want everything to be running and be efficient and be going. So I think practicing a bit of that restraint was difficult for me. But I think also it was also a thing of survival. I was like, look, I'm fortunate. I'm also very proud of how I've run businesses to keep them very cash strong, so they can survive incidents like this without huge adverse effects. And I think it's not commonly practiced these days. So the impact in terms of the slowness is bad, but I think things have kind of returned more to normal. From the commodities trading perspective, that's been a lot slower than normal, but it is a volatile industry, and so I've been fortunate to come out the other side without major consequence. But I just think it'll take long for the impacts to be felt, and I think for one, the business is not the same as we know it, regardless. And if you haven't been able to shift in this time to find a new way of operating, I think you might be a bit behind in the next few years.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing that. And what's next in terms of climbing in your world and adventure in general?
It's always the question, and I think I've been thinking a long time. I think within just the world uncertainty at the moment, I don't want to say too much, because even by our next climbing season, we're never going to know, what kind of difficulties one can have to climb in Nepal or Pakistan or whatever. But you know, it'll definitely be another mountain is next on the cards. So another mountain, and with no oxygen. So.
Okay, fantastic. So for those of you that are listening, Louis, do you want to guess what mountain that is? I've got my finger on K2 for Lysle, even though he's being secretive about it at the moment. So Lysle, thank you so much for joining me. I'd really appreciate it. Is there any last words that you want to leave me and everybody else that's been listening to us before we say goodbye?
No, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. It's always great to catch up with you. I hope we can do it more often.
Absolutely.
Just from people and from a South African point of view, I'm a big fan of always saying, are you part of the problem or are you part of the possible? For South Africa and the world at large, you know. So if we're not positively impacting things, we gotta really take a look at ourselves and join a collective family where we can be making great impact. So I leave everyone with that.
Okay, here is to greater impact. Charlene says K2, so there's two of us with K2. Louis says Everest. So I think Louis is probably right because you've done Everest with oxygen, now it's Everest without. And thank you guys for listening, and thank you once again for joining, and God bless.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, bye guys.